Hello, thanks for that amazing introduction, Tara. So, we are thinking all things sustainability for this afternoon. And one of the exciting things about the brief that we got from Rappel, the name that some of you may be more familiar with is Love Food, Hate Waste, is about faith communities and the role that they can play in sustainability. And one of the things that we often overlook in terms of sustainability or any kind of behavior change is that large populations of the world are, in fact, very strongly religiously observant, or at the very least, their religious identity plays a significant role in determining who they are. So, for example, globally, there are 1.8 billion Muslims. And around 90% of them, according to original research we've done at Ogilvy, shows that their faith plays an important role in who they are. So, where we are, sometimes it's easy to think of ourselves as the nuns that don't have NONES, not the religious habit wearing kind, that religious identity is important. And further, in terms of faith, there are embedded principles around sustainability, around protecting the environment, and around stewardship. So it's very interesting to be talking to these faith communities. But also from a behavior science perspective, and I'm going to talk through all of these in the case study that we have in a second, there are already habits around behavior change that are built into religious prescriptions, which can make it quite intriguing, but also quite exciting to try and hook some of that change into that. And finally, we see with faith communities that we have certain complexities, very heightened experiences, which can then lead to quite creative solutions for other communities that might be engaging in similar kinds of behaviors. So that's what I'm going to talk us through. So watch out for those key points as I go through the case study with Love Food, Hate Waste, and how we tackle food waste rising in Ramadan. So some of you will be familiar with the fact that Ramadan is a Muslim month of fasting. Muslims don't eat or drink anytime during daylight hours. And in the UK, the Muslim population is estimated at around 4 million. In the UK as well, this year, Ramadan fell in the month of April. And for those of you who are nerds like me, you will know that it gets light around 4 o'clock in the morning, but it doesn't get dark till around 8 p.m. And around the world, even if it's around the equator, you're at least halving the amount of hours that you can eat. So why is it that people are eating less or eating for less hours, but somehow food waste is going up? And that's the puzzle that we had to get to grips with. So we're trying to reduce food waste at a time where people are eating less. But Ramadan, like a lot of festivals, whether they are religious or cultural or national, is a time of great celebration. So people put their life on hold. It's a whole period of transformation. There's all that nostalgia that we have from, feelings like Christmas or Easter bunnies and chocolate eggs and so on. It's all about people coming together, focusing on the meal, breaking fast called iftar, and all the tradition and nostalgia and memory and feelings that you get from that. And the full table, as all of us who've celebrated any kind of festival will know, is part of that pleasure, is part of that joy, has the traditional foods that we are all familiar with. So essentially, we started from the place that the brief is, can you be a killjoy and completely ruin Ramadan and take away the sense of that meal that is so central to family life and so central to everything about the social as well as the religious customs? So we had to think about this. It's complicated. How do we reframe this brief away from being the killjoy, using the anchors that we have that are religious prescriptions, but also seeing if there are any cues? And so the first stage we had to go through is to understand the insights of what was happening in this community. And it's complicated. So I've thrown up some examples here of two religious imperatives that Muslims are tackling during this month, which at first glance appear to be contradictory. So on the one hand, there is a huge blessing, a massive religious imperative to share food, to invite guests, to be a generous host and have a party with a big iftar. So that means cooking lots of food. But on the other hand, there is also a very strong imperative in the Quran and Islamic teachings about not being wasteful. So our challenge is, how do we tackle these two seemingly conflicting religious imperatives, which everybody already knows anyway? And on top of that, we have to wrap in the social and cultural norms around that too. So people want to be sharing big meals with their family. There may be mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, in-laws who are trying to tackle that. And on top of that, we've got the rise of social media and what I've called the Instagrammable iftar. You've got to make sure your table is looking full. That's the complication of the what. But what about the who? Well, what we learn interestingly from a religious festival like Ramadan is that even though the prescription is the same for everybody, daylight hours, the way that people approach Ramadan is very different. And that unlayering, delayering, if that's a word, and trying to work out what's important for different people is really, really key. So in the work that we looked at, we thought about mothers who are responsible for the cooking, and we can have a separate conversation about gender relations. Mothers who are primarily responsible for cooking, who may say that they have lost the meaning of Ramadan under the pressure of cooking. Fathers who perhaps leave it to the women folk but could get more involved, or the example I've shown here, which is children actually who may not be fasting and may be looking for a role in Ramadan. And we created this lovely Ramadan calendar to help children and their pester power help people guide through Ramadan. I'll come back to mention this in a second as well. So who we're talking to and the insight is also really important. Perhaps what was central to our approach, though, is those deep kind of insights. So the Islamic marketing element that I was bringing to the conversation, our behavioral science team, and the way that they built those little chunking elements into the interventions. And then, of course, testing what's working, what isn't. And sometimes you just come up with a kind of creative idea. So one of the things that we explored is the idea of the full table that I was talking about. And you can see on the left here a tablecloth with a relatively full table. Can we do something to the tablecloth rather than the amount of food to make it feel like it's much fuller than it actually is? So that creativity and all of these were put through testing as well. And so, that's like a really whistle-stop tour of how you take that community expertise, the imperatives that are already embedded, but people need to have foregrounded, and that intensity of Ramadan. So it's like 30 Christmas dinners. So you get all of that to look at by way of insight and about how to create behavior change. And what we took from that, actually, along with trying to reduce food waste for Muslim communities, is there were a lot of very heightened learning. So what does that tell us about Christmas, for example? Could we have an Advent calendar like the one I showed you for Christmas to get children to help reduce waste? What does that tell us about weddings? How do you have joy of weddings and that feeling of needing to be generous so you could reduce food waste? What about Thanksgiving, and so on and so forth? And so really the thing to take away, apart from a really interesting project about getting 1.8 billion people around the world to reduce their food waste, is what can we learn from faith communities who are ready to engage with sustainability but who are not identified as having their religious observance as something important, but who already have the anchors for us to create that change. Lots of food for thought, every pun intended. Back over to you guys.
Just one favour. If you want to keep Nudgestock free, click the like button because the algorithm likes it, and click the subscribe button too. The algorithm likes that, and unlike the like button, it's actually useful because you'll get notified of future content from Nudgestock whenever it becomes available.